bunch of abbots, and they were very important ecclesiastical people, especially in the Middle Ages. They still use the term today in monasteries, the boss type of things. I'm sure you knew that. In any case, do you know what this is? This is Fabius. Or as the Latin would say, the Romans say Fabius. And we'll talk about this a little while. I'll leave this with Chuck. But I think it's important that you have some kind of semblance of Fabius, because we'll talk even about his name, which I think is extremely important and relevant to your community. And the question is, was it planned, or did it just happen? So in any case, this is for you people here. You can hang right in the middle up there. Chuck, you can blow it up probably, Chuck, you know?
Where did that illustration come from?
Well, that's a great question. I'm glad you asked that. My late mother-in-law was an artist, and she helped me to design my books. I think the important thing with literature, I think, is to have a picture of the community you're talking about, if there is one. And sometimes in the ancient world, there weren't pictures. There were sculptors who did work like that and so on. But what I did, I gave my mother-in-law, who was a well-known artist in the community, Tina Chapman, I gave her material, she researched it, and that's what she came up with. And so I think that's of course, they didn't have pictures in those days or photography, but of course, if you can read about someone, you get some kind of an idea of an individual. So the book is full of that, this kind of design and pictures. The important thing was that she died halfway through my book. And that Chuck was talking about getting people who've been around for a while on tape. And I think that's so important. My mother-in-law, who was not only an artist, but she was a poet, she could tell you almost anything in terms of poetic, in terms of poetry. And before she died, unfortunately, she never put a lot of these things down. She knew a lot about family history. I played golf with a guy who's 92 years old. He came from Clayton, New York. He has a fantastic background. His family goes way back to the Revolutionary War. He knows these things, but I can't get him to write them down or to even say anything about it. But I'm working on his daughter, and I hate to see that lost, in terms of history. In any case, I'm going to talk about 3 books tonight. 2 that are written, and 1 that I'm about to produce or publish, hopefully in about a year or so. And as I was saying earlier, I like names. And in front of every entry in my book, if the community is named after someone, there's probably a picture of that individual. What I also try to do is define whether it was a village, a hamlet, a town, or whatever. And then in it, talk about the origin of the name and some historical information about that particular name. So, let me just give you an example of this. Can you see that all right? Is that visible? Yes. Okay, what about this particular name here? Okay, the origin of Chuck Kutcher, right? Kutcher, okay. So from what I could decipher in terms of Chuck's name, it's really a name that has backgrounds with the German, English, and French people. It is a nickname generally for Charles, which really translates as man or free man. And it was made very popular by Charlemagne, who was a Holy Roman Emperor. He was really chanted as Charles the Great during the Middle Ages. Now, his family name, and I found this too, Chuck, I don't know, it seemed, as you know, names have changed over the years, especially when they came to this country. The people who were in charge of immigration weren't highly educated. Sometimes they didn't quite write the name down correctly. But anyway, they're both German names. And it's an occupation name for a driver of a coach or possibly a furrier. This term here, this name here, talks about possibly a furrier. So we may say then that if you translate Chuck Kutcher as a free man who drives a coach or a carriage, or a man who works with furs.
Thank you, Will. But if you want to call me Charles the Great, that's okay too.
Chuck the Great.
Chuck the Great, that's right. Okay, now, let's get into to the book itself. Let's realize, first of all, that we're going to deal here with 3 books, principally. So, Bettina Chapman and Carolyn Coit, the latter is now my illustrator, but we're dealing with characters in mythology, classical place names in New York State, and places and faces, stories behind the names of New York State, which I'm working on now. I'm going to give you a feel for each one of these books. In terms of mythology, it's an integral part of New York State history, actually. It's an integral part of classical place names. I have a whole chapter, which I call Mythology in New York, which deals with about 40 names throughout New York State, from the northern tier to the southern tier, from Buffalo to Albany. So, what may surprise you is some of these place names. Did you know, for example, that we had places in New York State by names? Again, this is simply a sample. And if we continue on that vein, again, just to tease you a little bit, look at these names. And they're found all over New York State. The question is, where did they come from? So that's the basic question. Why? And history tells us that after the American Revolution, the soldiers had not been paid. There was no money. So the powers that be decided that the best way to pay these soldiers were perhaps by giving them land. So they came up to this part of the state of New York, old Onondaga County. And they decided that after negotiating with the American Indians, Native Americans, they sent a surveying team up here, which was led by a man called Simeon DeWitt, who was the Surveyor General of New York State, and his sidekick, Robert Harper. Robert Harper was an Irish immigrant. He came to this country and taught mathematics at Columbia University, Queens College at that time. And he was, although he was a math professor, Harper was also a mythological scholar. And so being part of that land team, he came up to central New York with a surveying team, and they chalked out about 25 townships and numbered 1 through 25. But we don't like numbers unless we're mathematicians or accountants or whatever. So Harper says, well, let's convert those numbers into names. So what happened, therefore, was that all these names that we have here turned out to be something like this. And look at down there. And Fabius is on the bottom, believe me, just happens to be there. In terms of the name, Fabius really is on top, as we shall see as the evening passes. Chuck said I had about 3 hours, so. In any case, here's what we had. We had the surveying team come up here to this part of the state, and they mapped out this area here. Today, you can see it runs from Lake Ontario down to Ithaca, Geneva on the west, and Chenango on the east. So this is the military tract. This is the cradle of classical naming. So from 1795 to about 1850, Robert Harper got the ball rolling by submitting all these names that you found in the area we call Onondaga County, or the military tract. And you'll also note that many of the names are military names, generals and other officers in the military, governors. presidents, and so on. So if you're a person of importance, that probably will happen. Your name will be ingrained in one way or another. Now, when I discovered all these names, and by the way, I'm not really retired. I'm not retired. I'm rewired. And I discovered probably about maybe 300 names. I didn't quite know how to enter these names into a book form. So after a lot of thought, I decided, well, I'll do it ethnically. So the first chapter in my book is what I call Greece, New York. And again, look at the great names here. It's amazing. The idea of naming started spreading. Communities began to be born. People came from New England and started going west and to the southern tier. And when they came from New England, oftentimes they brought their name with them. Many times these names in New England are traceable back to Europe. And a lot of people were upset with Harper, by the way, and the surveying team for using all these European names, if you will. And basically, we're talking about European names, North African names, and Asian names. Because we're talking about classical place names. And what I mean by that is it would be those parts of the world that were affected by Rome. So look at these great names here. And the other thing that's important to realize is that if you were to translate Greece, it means venerable, pedestal type. The Romans put the Greeks on a pedestal, something like that, huh? Because they had a lot of respect for them in terms of their philosophy and their sculpture and their artistic and things like that. So Greece really means the idea of venerable. Akron means high place. Manoa means king. Galen, the town of Galen today, Galen was a physician to the emperors. So this area in New York State, Galen, that was set aside for doctors, nurses, and medical people. Ithaca really means island. The island of Ulysses or Odysseus. Solon, a man of wisdom. Athens, the goddess of wisdom. So you have these great names, and again, it's important to realize what they mean, I think, and where they came from, and so on. Philadelphia is definitely of the ancient world. Philos Delphos, in Greek, really means I love my brother, or brotherly love. This community up here was a remnant of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. People came from Philadelphia and made their way to New York and up into that part of the state and took the name. Not uncommon. Lysander was a naval commander. He was an admiral. Probably the best Greek admiral in the history of that country. Homer, not too far from here, the greatest name in literature. The poet. Blind poet. His name means something like hidden or cannot see or hostage, I think is the term they use. He's a hostage of his blindness. But he wrote two of the greatest poems ever written, the Iliad and the Odyssey. Aristotle. Well, probably the man who had the greatest intellect ever. And if you translate that name, it means the best. Jim Boeheim, when he won the national championship a few years ago, thought to change his name from James to Aristotle. Yes, he did. Plato. And again, he talked about the Olympics, which are on our doorstep today. Plato, not only was he an intellectual, but he was a wrestler. Plato means broad shoulders. So he had what you call mind and body, really both of which are extremely important for the total human being. The word marathon. We know that's a great run, and we know where that came from, at least mythologically. After the Greeks had defeated the Persians, the Philippides ran all the way from the plains of Marathon to Athens, about 26 miles. So we beat the Persians and won. Ergo, marathon. And look at this. Syracuse. Syracuse means swamp. Syracuse means yuck, in a sense. You know? It was about the last place that was really settled because it was swampy. No one lived there to speak of. There were a few Native Americans. But a big thing happened around the middle of the 1600s. A Jesuit priest came to the area. His name was Lemoyne College. And he taught the Native Americans about that stench, that tasty stuff was around that lake at that time, later on called Salt Lake, now undeveloped. So it was Father Lemoyne who taught Native Americans how to take the salt out of the water. Salt City, Syracuse, if you will. So, again, it's something that is fun to enjoy. Again, you take a look at some intellectuals when it comes to authors. All these great names are still read today. We would take, for example, Aristotle, still read today. Still read today. Homer, still reading the Iliad and the Odyssey. So it's just a great thing. The other amazing thing about this is this right here. If you take these great epic poems, you will notice that all the great individuals who are in this poem are in New York State. It just happened. There was no divine plan. It just happened. So all the great names, all the way, from Helen or Helena to Ulysses and so on, they're all in New York State, and that just happened. Next chapter is what I call, I'll just give you a taste of his Latin or Roman name in the Empire State. Again, Italy. If you take the word Italy, and this is relevant here, I think, to Fabius, because if you take a look at the origin of Italy, here's what you have. Vitulus in Latin means calf. If you take the suffix ia, which means land of, and add to this, you get land of the calves. A farming community. The people who lived there were called the Vitalian, people of Vitalian. If you eliminate the V, you have Italy. And Italus was the first mythical king of the great Italian peninsula. But again, look at these names. Palermo. I know you might think of Mafioso when you hear that, but in any case, Palermo means safe harbor. You all heard of Parmesan cheese? Constantia, named after Constantine the Great, first Christian emperor. His mother was called Helen, Saint Helen, the one who found the true cross crucified. Pompey, well, you're certainly familiar with Pompey, Fabius Pompey school system. What do our outside neighbors, how do they pronounce that? Pompeii, yuck, right? Yeah. And of course, Pompey really means fifth. It means fifth. Probably the fifth son in the family. Again, just a taste of the great names here. You all heard of Brutus, one of Julius Caesar's greatest friends who helped kill him. If you take the name today, you talk about brutal or brutal, you know that's sort of relevant when you kill your best friend. Sardinia, if you were to fly over the island of Sardinia in the Mediterranean, it looked just like a footprint. It means footprint. Ovid, New York, means sheep. The family goes back to sheep raising in ancient times. Marcellus, the great Roman general, great family. The word Mars is in front of him. He was a consul, therefore he was a general, and therefore they did follow Mars, the god of war. Virgil, what a name, Virgil. Virgil, New York. Virgil, the greatest Latin poet ever, wrote the Aeneid. One of the greatest stories ever written. Still read today in the Latin. I taught it in high school. His name means one, like magic wand. Now we get to the good stuff. Look at this. Yay, there's Fabius. Yeah. Okay. Well, interestingly, Cicero is a name that is called, it's a nickname, and it means mole or wart. Cicero, his name was Marcus Tullius Cicero. So we all have nicknames. When I was a kid, they called me Stiggy. I stick with this, they call me Stiggy. It's amazing how names, and they stick with it today. I meet people that I haven't seen in 50 years. They stick for it. They don't forget. And so the great Latin poet Cicero, his name really is, his nickname is Cicero. It means wart. Hi wart, how are you? Fabius, well, let's go to Cincinnati first. Cincinnati. His name is Curly. He had curly hair, apparently. And he was a consul 5 times. I think he has Fabius one time, right? And I had the honor of going down to that small community about 2 years ago with my granddaughter playing soccer. And I went down there and we lost the game. But as I walked out in front of the school, I looked, my God, they had a statue of Cincinnati. Another statue. I had no camera. I go back and take pictures. It was amazing. And Vestal, by the way, Vestal probably named after a church at one time. The Vestal Virgins were very important people in ancient Rome. They walked on water, so to speak. They were virgins, at least for 30 years. But they had a lot of power. A lot of power indeed. And Vestal Virgins were highly respected. And people believed they had the power to heal them, that type of thing. If a Vestal Virgin committed adultery, they would be stoned. If they had a pure life and lived out their life, they would be buried in the walls of Rome, which was a very, very new thing. They were highly honored, the Vestal Virgins. Fabius. Well, we all know what Fabius looks like, at least in the eyes of the artist. I think that the interesting thing about this man is this. This is his full name. Quintus Fabius Maximus Vercusos Punctatus. And again, the thing here is that Punctator and Vercusos are nicknames. Vercusos is something like Cicero. It means like a growth or a wart. So he too, like Cicero, had a wart on his face or nose. Punctator means the delayer. Now, Fabius was a great Roman general. He came from a very aristocratic family. And he was highly respected. And he was very successful against Hannibal. Hannibal was one of the greatest generals ever. He had Rome on his knees. He was a Phoenician or a Carthaginian. And it was Fabius that stopped him during various times of that Punic War. In any case, Fabius, Quintus means fifth, like Poppy means fifth. So if you translate that, it means Fabius, the fifth son, the great fifth son, had a wart on his nose and was sometimes called the delayer. That's his full name. We all have nicknames probably, and that's the way it goes. Now again, Robert Harper is the man who coined the name. Again, he was a member of the Surveyor General Land Board. And Fabius actually means bean, by the way. I didn't say that. I should have said that. The best way to translate that would be fifth son of the bean family. They apparently grew beans. There's the tie to Fabius. Fabius today is an agrarian society. It's a farming community, right? And you have a name that not only was it related to farming in terms that his posterity were farmers, the fact that he was a great general who was highly rewarded. He was a consul 5 times, and he helped to save Rome from Hannibal. So the other thing is, he's called Punctator, the layer. That today would be called like hit-and-run tactics. you take a look at the very last one, so Fabian tactics were really like hit and run. And General Schwarzkopf in the Iraq War in 1991 used Fabian tactics. So it's still alive. Guerrilla warfare, hit and run, that kind of thing.
You just forgot the mop.
Yes, that's right. That's right. Again, get some great names here. Manlius. Manlius probably means morning. I live in the town of Manlius. And again, what people don't realize, and you have it here, speak of Fabius, they probably think of the town, or maybe the village. Probably the village, I don't know. What do you think? I know that when people speak of Manlius, they speak of the village of Manlius, don't realize it's a town of Manlius. I live in Fayetteville, but in the town of Manlius. So people don't realize that. So I think that's also something to keep in mind. Como, there was a Roman deity called Comus, the deity of revelry, fun, drinking, that type of thing. And that is probably where that came from. Manlius, as that means morning. Minerva. Minerva is the Roman translation of Athena, wisdom. In the front of that word, look at M-I-N, the Latin word is mens, mind. You hear mensa? Mensa? That so-called, that group that you can qualify, become a member of if your IQ is 150 and up. I only missed it by about 50. But in any case, Minerva is the goddess of wisdom. So, you certainly have some interesting names here. Now, we were talking about Hannibal. What people don't know, perhaps, is the fact that he was a Phoenician. And Phoenicia, as you may or may not know, geographically, you see, is over here in the eastern Mediterranean. And they were called the missionaries of civilization. They were the first to circumnavigate Africa. They developed an alphabet. They were business people. And throughout the Mediterranean, you had just all kinds of colonies that were founded by the Phoenicians. And so they were also the people who developed purple dye, the color of royalty. Even today, people of royalty wore purple. The cardinals in Rome wore purple. Kings today still wear purple to some degree. So that goes back a very, very long ways. But again, look at these names. And these are all Phoenician names. People think they're Greco-Roman names, and they're not. They're not. Utica means old city. People think it's an Italian name. Carthage means new city. Utica was their first, Carthage was planted there later on, therefore new city. And when you talk about people, generals, Hannibal was the one that's known for crossing the Alps with elephants. Army ready to take care of Rome. And his name means grace of Baal, Hannibal. Baal was a sun god. So his name really has a godliness to it, godlike type thing to it. Barcelona was named after Amilcar Barca, the father of Hannibal, another great general. They call him Lightning because he was quick in battle. When things happened, he did them very, very quickly. And what's fun about this is, and we're going to get to that a little later, is how some of these great names have been given domestic pronunciation. Now, we all know, I think, that if you go to Cadiz in Spain, it's pronounced Cadiz. But when you get to this part of New York, down here, it's pronounced Cadiz. And I think that's very, very interesting. The other thing I think that's important to realize is that I have a chapter on mythology. And again, there's mythological names all over the place. You believe that there is an Atlantis, New York, up in the St. Lawrence area. That there is a Bellona, New York. Bellona was the wife or daughter of Mars. So she's the goddess of war. When the Romans were ready for battle in March, that's the month they marched to battle, she would get in front of the armies, get them all psyched up. Her hair was like Phyllis Diller's hair. And she was a cheerleader, this type of thing. And she tried to get these people, these soldiers, psyched up for war. The Roman goddess of war. Etna apparently takes its name, it means burning. So if you were to have driven by this community at times, in earlier times, you probably would have seen the smokestacks of the factories. We think probably that Cuba probably is named after Fidel Castro's island, but it's not. Interestingly enough, it's named after the Roman goddess of the crib. When mothers put their babies in the crib at night, they get on their knees and they would pray to Cuba to protect their baby from the evil of darkness. How much time left? 2 hours, you think? But anyway, here's a picture of Cuba. There she is here, the Roman goddess of the crib. Another interesting thing about this is these names here. And we have some great stories here. Again, we take a look at Helena or Helen, named after the queen of Sparta. She was the one that was kidnapped, if you will, by Paris in the great story. And she was said to be the most beautiful woman of her time. And she was the face that launched 1,000 ships. The Trojan War that you've all read about her. It was her face that launched 1,000 ships, so to speak. And if you translate the word Helen, it means destroyer of ships. How about that? Diana. One of my daughter's name is Diana. Anyway, it has a divine meaning. It too is like Hannibal, in that you see the word DI in there, it's part of the word for God. So that really means sort of godliness. But in any case, in this particular situation, in the early 1800s, a man called Joseph Bonaparte, he had an obscure villain named Napoleon, and he bought a whole tract of land up here. If you go up here today, you would find Lake Bonaparte. That's where it came from. And he was a great hunter. People loved this guy. He built a palatial estate on the lake called Lake Bonaparte. He held great parties, free food, free drink, whatever. People loved this guy. He also loved to hunt. And Diana was the Roman goddess of the hunt. Albion, New York. Albion, that's the ancient name for England. If you translate Albion, it means white. The first mythical king of England was called Albion. He taught people how to build ships, maybe agriculture and so on. If you were to leave France and go across the channel and go into the Thames River area, you would see the white cliffs of Dover. Albion, white. Now, can anybody here describe this name to me? Medusa? Well, this is how my mother-in-law describes him, or decided to draw her, I should say. Now, will you tell me why anybody would name their community Medusa after realizing this? You wanted to guess? So Medusa really means ruler or queen. Extremely beautiful, but she was punished by a kingdom where she was naughty in her temple. So she became a Gorgon, which means ugly. And if a Gorgon would look at you, you would be stoned. Or if you looked at her, you would be stoned. So the only explanation that the historian there could tell me is that the people, two things I guess, the people really didn't understand who Medusa was, but they liked the name because it was the period of keeping up with the Joneses. The cradle of classical name was in Onondaga County, which spread like wildfire throughout the states from 1790 to 1850. People wanted to keep up with the Joneses. They liked short, fancy, exotic names. And Medusa certainly fits the bill. Or possibly they chose Medusa, not realizing that she was a Gorgon. So it's interesting. Another chapter that I'd like to share with you is a chapter on the Bible. I have a chapter called Biblical New York. Look at these great names. They just keep coming at you. Probably most of these, again, were churches at one time. Because early on, especially during the Revolutionary War period, first thing built was a church around which people would build their homes. You found graveyards. And today you don't find that much anymore, except the ones that were built or associated years ago. But in any case, I mean, look at these great names. You have Pisgah. This is where Moses, the Holy Land, the Promised Land at one point. Mount Sinai on the island, where the Ten Commandments, of course, were given to him. You have Bethlehem, which is where Jesus was born. Galilee, where he was grown up. Jordan, where he was baptized by John the Baptist. Jordan means descender, it means the river descends from the Golan Heights down into Israel. Way just a minute. And of course, Jerusalem, which means the city of peace, but outside of which he was crucified, Christ was, and buried there shortly after. Now look at this. Why would anybody name their community Sodom? You speak of the story of Sodom and Gomorrah. Yuck. The story goes this way, that the men worked hard all week long, but on the way home, on Fridays, after you got paid, where would they stop? At the tavern. The tavern was not a place where you could always get a drink, but the court was there sometimes, and it was also a place where other things went on. But after a period of time, the local clergyman got upset because many of the men would work all week, go to the tavern, spend all their money, go home with nothing. And the women didn't like that. Can we blame them? So it got to a point where the clergyman got together with the people of the fathers of the community and said, we've got to stop this. Because that tavern is nothing but a den of iniquity, the Sodom and Gomorrah. And that's where the name apparently. Well, actually, you'll find a lot of duplicate names throughout New York State. The difference is, the key is that you can only have one post office. The post office had the power when it came to naming. And oftentimes, well, even Syracuse at one time had many names. But when I wanted a post office back in 1820, they had to change it because at that time Syracuse was called Corinth. And so the story goes that John Wilkinson, fellow from Minneapolis, being the first postmaster, he just wrote a poem on Syracuse, Sicily. And he said, my goodness, there are so many similarities between Syracuse, Sicily, and Syracuse, New York. Well, Corinth, New York, at that time. They were both small communities, both had walls, both were on salt water and fresh water. They both had comparable populations. They both had a place to know called Salina or Salina. And you know that Salina means salt. Salina Street downtown Syracuse. So Wilkinson at that time decided that he had to change his name because there already was a Corinth, New York. They have a post office. So the postmaster said, okay, we'll use Syracuse. There's a lot of Syracuse. They have so many things in common. So that's where Syracuse came from. And so you will have a number of duplications, but only one of them can have a post office to prevent problems. Another hour or so, 10 minutes? Anybody yawning yet? Please don't yawn. Okay. So just to give you just another hint here of what we're going to do here in terms of these biblical names. Again, look at Herman, Mount Herman, is in Herman, New York. It means forbidden peak. Hebron is a place where God took the slime of the earth, breathed into it, and we have Adam. Later on, from his rib, we had Eve. Nile, the Nile, of course, is where Moses was thrown basket and was floating down the Nile and was picked up by the Pharaoh's wife and raised Moses. Moses was almost a pharaoh. That's P-H-A-R, not F-A-R-R-E. But Canaan, he's lowland or land of bliss. The same is true with Eden, the land of bliss. So, let me just give you another feeling for what has happened in these ancient names. Look what has happened historically to these names. If you take a look at, we know that's Vienna, Austria, but if you were to go to this part of Oneida County, they would pronounce it Vienna. If you were to take a look at the name Medina, the town of Ridgeway, this really, Medina, is the pronunciation in Saudi Arabia. You get Mecca and Medina, holy city in Saudi Arabia. The folks here pronounce it Medina. This is where my wife is very upset. She would taught French for 39 years. And we have spent time at Versailles, south of France, a palatial place where peace treaties, international peace treaties were signed. They're very prestigious. But folks there in Perrysburg pronounce it Versailles. We know it's Genoa, Italy, but they pronounce it Genoa. We know that it's Cairo, the largest city in Africa, the capital of Egypt. They pronounce it Cairo, like the syrup. And if you were from Italy, you know it's Milan, Milano. But here, of course, it's Milan. Milan. So, there's nothing wrong with that. You know, it's just interesting. I'm sure that if President Kennedy would have lived longer, that perhaps the island of Cuba would be called Cuba because of the Bostonian accent, don't you think? I mean, it's prestigious people who have the power to change names. We know that it's Madrid, Spain, but up here in St. Lawrence they pronounce it Madrid. We're going to China very soon for the Olympics, yes? And one big city there is Canton, but we know that in St. Lawrence they pronounce it Canton. Again, if you go to Spain, it's Castile in Spain, but here in Wyoming County, New York, they pronounce it Castile. We all know of Simon Bolivar, the great South American hero and general. But here in Madison County and Allegheny County, they pronounce it Bolivar. And we know it's Berlin, Italy, but here they pronounce it Berlin. Not Berlin, Berlin. And we know that it's Delhi, India. The folks down there pronounce it Delhi. It's fun. Is it really fun? And I'll tell you a story right here is where I got really hit in the face when I first started this project. I tried to talk to Tom of Manly's historian, but she was busy, so she gave me the name of someone who lived in this community. So I called up and said who I was and what I was doing. And I said to them, I said, can you tell me about the origin of Oran? And the lady says, well, I have no idea. Where's that? Well, how do you pronounce your community? It's Oran. Oh, excuse me. So I've learned that when I talk to historians, that you first ask them how they pronounce their community. You're surprised sometimes what they do, the names. We know that it was General Pulaski. In fact, there are still people in the village of this town of Richland that want to change it to Pulaski, but they do pronounce it Pulaski. This really is called Chile today. It's really from the country of Chile, along the coast of South America. Tripoli, it really means three cities. The people here pronounce it Tripoli. So it's just a fun thing. And look at this. We also have names here that are doubled. I mean the same thing. Troy, New York, of course, the great place of Troy. Troy people here in Ilion wanted to change their name to Troy. Post office said you can't do it. So what they did, they took the counter, the Greek or Latin spelling for Troy, which is Ilion. Now look at Tully, New York. Tully comes from Tullius. Again, you have Marcus Tullius Cicero. So this is where Tully is simply they've anglicized the word Tullius. So Cicero, being great, apparently, his name is used twice in New York State. Naples and Napoli, both of these mean new city, by the way. This is pronounced Napoli, by the way, not Napoli. It would be Napoli in Italy. So again, you know, it's this is a lot of fun in terms of names. Now let me just spend 10 minutes giving you a feel for what I'm doing now, just for fun. Now, what I'm doing now is I'm dealing with every hamlet and community in New York State. I'll be dealing with maybe 800 names, or to give you a more exact figure, here's what we're going to have here. So every county, every city, all the towns, all the villages, and more, we'll be dealing with words, names that extend beyond counties. So the book might well be 800, 900 pages, because you're going to have picture illustrations and countless maps. The thing to do is to show the reader where the place is in New York State, what the name means, and something about the origin of the name, and historical things about historical or mythological things, parables about the community. What I learned when doing this is that you have a lot of states in New York, and these aren't all of them. These are not all of them. And to look at it from a more prestigious point of view, perhaps, we even have our own United Nations. I was talking to the town of Russia historian recently. In the town of Russia, the historian is also the librarian in the village of Poland, which is in Russia. And if you go a little north of Russia, you have Ohio. So you can have quite a trip in one day.
About 30 miles.
Yeah, that's right. It's fun. Russia. There's a Russia, New York. Well, yeah, there is. And that's one reason why I'm writing this book, and people I think should be aware of that. And again, this is not all of them, but this is the majority of them. And some of them are just crossroads, but if you look back at the history of these places, they have some very important things to show you. Now, we also know that if you're in New York, you can be confused at times. So we have to get our P's and Q's straight here. Because sometimes we can be confused between Plattsburgh and Prattsburg. They sure sound alike. So these are homonyms that can be confusing, and it's important to know that when you're taking a drive, perhaps, to these places. Or even nearby Janesville. Janesville and Janesville. And Janesville, in terms of where that name comes from, there are several theories, but the one that people like best is that it's named after James Monroe. And then, of course, we have Paris and Parish. Again, watch our P's and Q's here. Paris, of course, is the Trojan prince who fell in love, I guess, with Helen and took off, as we said earlier, and had to face a lot of shit, and he was on his way back home to Troy. And Ross Paris, of course, David Paris was a very important landowner. And we have this tongue twister. We have Messina and Mycenae. I'm about 2 miles from Mycenae. But again, they could be confused. People think that perhaps the seat in New York came down to one of Napoleon's generals, but they also have other theories. Sometimes there are no answers. Sometimes there are theories, sometimes there are several answers. How about being confused by Kirkland, Kirkville, and Kirkwood? All these Kirk, it means church. So you have all these various places throughout New York State. And then, talk about confusion. The Indian names. 1/3 of the counties in New York State are Native American names. But look at this. Oswego, Otsego, Otsisco, Otsego, Otsego, Owasco, Owego. Where are we going? You know, it's interesting. But we're able to know what their communities' names mean. Now, isn't this confusing? Isn't this really confusing? I said, wow. You know, wow. Really confusing. And this, the sad part of New York history, perhaps. Fort Drum has expanded over the years. During its expansion, communities have been lost and never returned. And what are all these reservoirs about? All these reservoirs feed New York City. And at the bottom of some of these reservoirs are communities that have never been reborn, lost. This red spot here is the one just north of Utica. Delta Reservoir. That community is at the bottom. Now, some fun things about this are these names. Fishkill, you know, if we begin down there, you know, you look at that name to begin with, you say, what the deuce is that all about? But it's nothing. The Dutch coin, it's a Dutch term. And if you look up here, it's simply, Fishkill is the anglicization of the word Fiskill, which means Fisher's Creek. When I first saw that, I said, what the deuce? Why would someone name their community Fishkill? Let's kill fish. Or you take a look at Painted Post. The story of Painted Post is that there was a battle down there in that area during the time of the American Revolution. The chief of the militant group was slain near a stump, and to memorialize him, they took his blood and they simply painted the stump with his blood. Again, in the same era of the American Revolution, American soldiers were hungry. They had to eat, so they slew a number of horses, and they stacked their skulls up. Or stoned out to death, but that's the way they were found. Penn is a compromise name. This area here the community was undecided about its name. Half were from Pennsylvania, and half were from Yankee land or New England. So they said Penn to compromise. Same with Lonsdale, New York. They wanted to build a new seat of government, because there was trouble between two communities. And so they built between two communities, but they built in a swamp. Canastota and Oneida. And so it was called Swampsville for a while. Then the founding fathers said, well, that's not very dignified. So they dropped the S. Swampsville. Now, when we see that, we think of Adolf Hitler and his evil ways. But if you go back in history, a swastika is a Hindu sign of peace and tranquility. So this has nothing to do with Adolf Hitler. This was hundreds of thousands of years before that. In Porkerville, I called, I don't know how many people find out New York with that name. Then I said, well, Bill, use your head, use your language background, and you see that the suffix ville is French or Latin for community, and Porker sounds like what, Bill Farrell? Pigs. So it's either a place where they raise pigs or slaughter pigs, probably. But there's no right. And the other thing thing that's happening all the time, there are changes in New York State going on. There is a movement on now to create a 63rd county up this part of the area. They want to call it Adirondack County, so it would be the 63rd. So you take half the town from Franklin County and half from Essex County and create a new county. But as yet, this has been tabled. But it happens all the time. And what's happened recently, I know, with the police department and Clay. People are beginning to realize that it's difficult. And all these changes that go on in terms of community name changes are economic. I mean, this here, Sleepy Hollow, this particular community here, was changed, it was Tarrytown. It's changed to Sleepy Hollow because they thought that would draw more tourists. So it's, that's the luck. And to end it, let's take a look at this. My mother lived in Neville. People all thought that Neville was a Native American name. But these are names in reverse. The people, as you can see, they were humble. They decided that they didn't want their name used. His name was Warden. Mr. Warden was the Warden Street in Neville. He said, yeah, you can use my name, but let's have to reverse it. The same is true with Brestoff and Foster.